My in-laws replaced me with their so-called perfect daughter-in-law. They thought I'd stay quiet, but instead, I quietly took back everything they thought they'd stolen. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. When I married Mark, I knew his parents weren't exactly thrilled about me. I wasn't from money, I didn't have a fancy career, and I didn't carry the kind of polish they thought their son deserved. But I loved him. I thought love and loyalty would matter more than social standing. I was wrong. From the very beginning, his parents made sure I felt like an outsider in their world. Every dinner, every holiday, every conversation was peppered with little digs at me. My job as a nurse wasn't impressive enough. My clothes were too plain, and my quiet nature was interpreted as weakness. I tried to ignore it for the sake of my marriage, but deep down, it chipped away at me. Things shifted dramatically the day Claire appeared. She was everything they wanted: wealthy, elegant, always dressed like she walked out of a magazine spread. From the moment she entered their lives, they treated her like royalty. Suddenly, all the attention and warmth that had been withheld from me was showered on her. They praised her constantly, talking about her charity work, her connections, her refined taste. And me? I was invisible. They didn't even bother hiding their preference anymore. Claire was the daughter-in-law they had always dreamed of. I told myself it was harmless, that she was just a family friend, someone passing through. But then came the comparisons. Every gathering turned into a subtle competition I never asked to be a part of. If I brought a dish, Claire's was better. If I wore a dress, Claire's was more sophisticated. If I spoke about my long shifts saving lives, Claire's business trips were somehow more impressive. And Mark, my husband, the man I trusted, started echoing his parents' words. He brushed off my concerns, telling me I was being insecure, that Claire was just helping the family. But I wasn't imagining it. I could feel myself being erased, piece by piece. The way his mother would ignore me at the dinner table to ask Claire about her day. The way his father's eyes lit up when she entered the room. Even the way Mark leaned toward her when they laughed together. It wasn't just in my head, it was happening right in front of me. The worst part wasn't their cruelty. It was Mark's silence. He didn't defend me, didn't stand up for me, didn't remind them that I was his wife. Instead, he let them elevate Claire while I became background noise in my own marriage. That's when the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just being compared anymore. I was being replaced. And if they thought I'd sit back quietly and let it happen, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. It started subtly, like a shadow creeping into a room. Every time I stepped into my in-laws' house, there she was, Claire, shining like a carefully polished diamond. The moment she walked in, the room shifted. Compliments poured over her like confetti, while I sat in silence, shrinking further into the background. She didn't even have to try. They adored her effortlessly. They bragged about her family's wealth, her private schooling, the way she carried herself with grace. Meanwhile, I became their favorite punching bag. My long shifts at the hospital meant nothing compared to her business ventures. My scrubs were too plain, while her designer dresses were applauded. Even my childhood, the modest way I grew up, became ammunition for their backhanded remarks. At gatherings, the imbalance was suffocating. Claire would sweep in, kiss everyone's cheeks, and sit at the head of conversations while I practically blended into the wallpaper. Plates were passed to her first, glasses topped off before anyone else's. I could bring dessert, but hers was the one they devoured with delight. I could speak, but my words always landed flat compared to her polished stories. The most painful part wasn't the comparisons. It was watching Mark shift right alongside them. At first, he'd brush off their favoritism with awkward smiles, but soon he began to parrot their words. "Why don't you try dressing more like Claire? She's really impressive, Lena. Maybe you could learn from her." Each comment sliced deeper than the last. I wasn't just dealing with disapproving parents anymore. I was losing my husband to their narrative. Every time I tried to talk about how isolated I felt, Mark dismissed it. He told me I was being sensitive, that I was imagining slights where none existed. But I wasn't blind. I could see the way his eyes lingered on her, the way he laughed at her jokes a little too long, the way he seemed more present when she was in the room than when he was alone with me. The house that once felt like a place of family turned into a stage where I was the unwanted extra. Even small details started to sting. His mother would invite Claire shopping, but never ask me. His father boasted about her career achievements, yet ignored my own sacrifices at the hospital. The message was loud, even if no one spoke it outright. Claire was everything I was not. And slowly, a sickening thought rooted itself inside me. This wasn't just admiration. They weren't simply comparing us. They were grooming her to step into my place. It wasn't paranoia. It was too deliberate, too rehearsed. They wanted her to be the wife standing beside Mark, not me. And the more they elevated her, the more invisible I became. It was late one evening when the truth finally slipped through the cracks. I had walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, moving quietly, when I heard voices drifting from the dining room. I froze as soon as I recognized them, Mark and his parents. My name came up, followed by a sentence that twisted my stomach. Claire is more fitting for the family name. I stood still, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for my husband to defend me, to push back against their cruelty. But his silence never came. Instead, I heard him sigh and murmur in agreement. "You're right. She just doesn't fit." My hands shook as I clutched the wall for balance. In that moment, it wasn't just their judgment crushing me. It was his betrayal, his refusal to stand by me when it mattered most. After that night, I began noticing patterns I had tried to ignore. Mark would leave the house claiming he had errands to run with his parents, but somehow Claire was always part of those outings. Grocery shopping, meetings, even casual lunches, she was always there. He didn't bother to mention her involvement, as though slipping her into his schedule was the most natural thing in the world. Once, I found a receipt tucked in his jacket pocket, dinner for two at a restaurant far from town. When I asked about it, he shrugged it off, saying it was business. But I wasn't blind anymore. I could see how their connection had grown, how comfortable they'd become with each other, while I was left on the sidelines. It was worse than infidelity in the physical sense. It was the erosion of everything I thought we'd built together. Every laugh they shared, every secret plan they whispered behind closed doors, it all chipped away at me. I had given years of my life to support him, pouring my income into our home, balancing his ambitions with my sacrifices. Now it felt like my contributions were erased, replaced by the fantasy of a woman they deemed more suitable. The realization burned through me with a clarity I couldn't escape. I wasn't simply unloved, I was unwanted. Not only emotionally, but financially as well. The house, the accounts, the life we had constructed together. It had become a stage where I was no longer the leading role. Claire was stepping into my place, as though I were nothing more than a placeholder until someone better arrived. Standing in the quiet of my own living room one night, I felt the weight of it settle fully. I wasn't just being betrayed as a wife. I was being written out of the script entirely, replaced in every sense of the word. And for the first time, I understood. If I didn't act, they would succeed in erasing me completely. I couldn't hold it in any longer. One night, after another unexplained absence, I asked Mark directly what was happening. My voice trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion. I needed honesty. Instead, he tilted his head, sighed, and accused me of blowing things out of proportion. "You're overreacting. Claire is just helping the family. Stop being insecure." His tone wasn't angry. It was dismissive, as if my pain was nothing more than an inconvenience to him. The words clung to me like poison. For years, I had believed marriage meant partnership, that when doubts crept in, you worked together to steady the ground beneath you. But that night, I realized he wasn't interested in saving what we had. He was more concerned with protecting the illusion his parents adored. The next gathering only confirmed it. I sat at the table surrounded by voices that rose and fell in laughter, none of which included me. His parents no longer bothered with subtlety. Their jabs at me were sharper, louder, designed to remind me of my place, or rather, of the place they no longer believed I had. When I tried to join a conversation, they cut me off mid-sentence, turning their attention back to Claire with practiced ease. And then I saw it, a small detail, but one that struck me like a knife. Dangling from Claire's neck was a delicate pendant I had chosen with Mark years earlier. A piece meant to symbolize something only we shared, now resting against her skin as if it belonged to her all along. My chest tightened. It wasn't just jewelry. It was evidence of how fully they had taken what was mine and placed it on someone else without shame. I excused myself to the restroom, not because I needed to, but because I could feel the cracks forming. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, eyes hollow, shoulders sagging under the weight of betrayal. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the cold tile floor. But as I steadied myself, something hardened inside me. If they wanted me invisible, I would let them believe it. If they wanted Claire to be the shining replacement, I would play along. But beneath their noses, I would prepare. Not with screaming or begging, but with silence, calculation, and patience. They mistook my quiet nature for weakness, but they had no idea what it meant when someone like me finally reached the edge. When I rejoined the table, no one noticed the shift. I smiled faintly, nodded when spoken to, even laughed politely at a joke I didn't hear. But inside, the decision was already made. They wanted me gone. Fine. I would leave on my own terms, and when I did, they would regret every moment they thought I was too small to fight back. I began moving like a ghost through the life we'd shared, careful to leave no obvious trace. Mornings found me at my laptop before dawn, combing through bills, bank statements, and old emails while the house slept. I photocopied tax forms, bookmarked transfers, and photographed receipts that proved what I'd quietly contributed over the years. Each file I added felt less like paperwork and more like ammunition, evidence that everything I'd sacrificed had not been invisible after all. At night, I made small, deliberate extractions. The framed Polaroid from our first apartment, the recipe box my grandmother had stamped with flour, the tiny lamp Mark and I had picked out on a rainy Saturday. Not dramatic theft, nothing to trigger alarm, just items that held meaning for me alone. I moved them to a storage unit under a different name, wrapped and labeled, as if I were cataloging my own history for safekeeping. It was comforting, watching pieces of my life find sanctuary beyond their reach. Conversations with a lawyer happened in muted rooms over coffee, my voice steady but measured. I described the joint accounts, loan contributions, and the signatures I'd placed on paperwork while juggling 12-hour shifts. I asked questions I should have asked years ago. What rights do I have if I leave? How are assets divided when one partner's labor supported the household more than their partner's? The answers mattered, and I absorbed them like a map. Legal advice transformed my fog of anger into a concrete plan. Simultaneously, I started building a quiet archive. Photos of text messages, screenshots of calendar entries, and notes on suspicious patterns. Dinners, meetings, small vacations that coincided with their sudden closeness, all filed and dated. It felt strange and clinical to reduce betrayal to documents, but that neatness was necessary. Emotions cloud, but paper does not. Paper remembers. I tightened my personal budget, redirected automatic deposits, and opened accounts under my own name. I arranged consultations with a financial advisor who didn't blink at my story and helped me separate funds without fanfare. Independence requires logistics, and I learned to love the small victories. A corrected account number, a transferred utility bill, a key to a mailbox that held only my name. Each step felt like reclaiming a parcel of myself. There were nights when the isolation stung, the ritual of hiding things, the loneliness of secrecy. I missed the uncomplicated days before suspicion made everything heavy. But the ache was tempered by clarity. I recognized how much of our life had been built upon my steady paycheck and late-night sacrifices. They had counted on that reliability as insurance, assuming loyalty would be everlasting and unquestioned. That assumption had been their blind spot. With documents secured, sentimental objects relocated, and legal counsel in place, I assembled the final pieces. The structure that had supported their attempts to displace me was exposed for what it was: a house propped up by my labor and my patience. I didn't crave spectacle or vindictiveness. I simply wanted what was rightfully mine. The preparations weren't loud, they were precise. When the moment came to walk away, I would do so with evidence in hand, calm in my step, and no one left who could convincingly say I hadn't earned everything I took. I became an actress in my own life, slipping into the role of the devoted partner while inside I was already gone. I cooked the meals, folded the laundry, and smiled when necessary, never hinting at the fire building beneath my skin. The performance kept suspicion at bay. Mark believed my silence was surrender, but really it was strategy. The more invisible I appeared, the freer I was to prepare. Behind the curtain of routine, they grew careless. Claire's visits stretched longer, her laughter echoing through the house like she had a claim to it. Mark stopped masking his preference for her company. He lingered near her in ways he never lingered with me. His parents fueled the charade, inviting her to events without even extending me the courtesy of a mention. It was as if I had already been written out of the picture, and they were merely waiting for the final curtain call. Their arrogance worked in my favor. When people believe you no longer matter, they stop watching you closely. I began withdrawing in ways they couldn't see. Transfers from joint accounts trickled into places only I controlled. Small enough to avoid alarms, steady enough to accumulate into independence. Bills once paid automatically through our shared funds were rerouted, leaving me with leverage they didn't realize was slipping from their grasp. Each adjustment was another brick pulled from the wall they thought surrounded me. While they paraded their imagined future, I kept building my own quiet record. Every slight, every instance of neglect, every interaction that showcased their favoritism found its way into neatly organized folders. Screenshots, timestamps, receipts. It wasn't about clinging to pain but proving a pattern. Betrayal often hides in shadows, but I made sure this one would be exposed in the brightest light. The strange part was how calm it made me feel. Before, I had drowned in doubt and humiliation. Now, I floated above it, watching their theater play out while I took notes from the balcony. Their boldness didn't crush me anymore. It sharpened me. Every moment they flaunted Claire, as though she'd already replaced me, became another piece of evidence, another stitch in the safety net I was weaving for myself. To them, I seemed subdued, even pliant. They mistook my quiet for defeat. In reality, I was slipping further from their grasp with each passing day. The money I'd worked for was no longer fueling their plans. The history they were rewriting had already been archived on my hard drive, and the wife they thought they could discard was preparing to leave them holding nothing but their illusions. I learned to embrace the stillness, the deliberate patience of someone who no longer needed approval. They thought I was disappearing, but I wasn't fading. I was pulling away on my own terms, carrying with me everything they assumed I would leave behind. And when the time came, they would discover that my silence had never been weakness at all. It had been the sound of me sharpening the knife. The dinner table was set like a stage, silverware gleaming under the chandelier, laughter bubbling around me as if I were merely part of the decor. I sat quietly, letting the conversation flow, letting them bask in their delusion. They spoke of Claire as though she were the crown jewel of the family. Compliments spilled without pause, her charm, her potential, her fit for their legacy. At one point, Mark's mother clasped Claire's hand and said, almost proudly, "You feel like the daughter we were meant to have." My stomach didn't twist this time. Instead, I felt steady, as if I had rehearsed the moment 100 times. I let the praise echo for a beat too long before setting down my fork. All eyes shifted toward me, expecting the usual silence. Instead, I smiled, not wide, not forced, but sharp enough to cut through the charade. "I'm glad you've all found someone who meets your standards," I said evenly. "Because I won't be standing in your way any longer. I've filed for divorce." The words dropped into the room like a stone in still water. Mark froze, his fork midair. His father's brow furrowed, his mother gasped, and Claire stiffened though she quickly tried to compose herself. I reached into my bag and placed a neatly bound folder on the table, sliding it toward Mark. Inside, you'll find copies of bank statements, receipts, and correspondence that outline exactly what's been going on between you and Claire. Mark's face drained of color. He fumbled with the papers, flipping through the proof he never thought I would collect. "Lena, this isn't what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like." I cut in, my tone calm, unwavering. "And more importantly, it's what the court will see." His parents erupted then, anger, denial, insults hurled like stones in my direction. They called me spiteful, accused me of twisting the truth. But their fury only fueled my clarity. I leaned back, unbothered, and revealed what they hadn't expected. "The house you've all been so comfortable in? It's under my name. The accounts you thought Mark controlled? My contributions outweigh his, and I've already ensured they're protected. Every asset tied to my labor, my income, and my sacrifices, they're secured. You won't touch them." Claire, ever the actress, placed a hand on her chest and whispered, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But her eyes betrayed her panic. She had believed she was stepping into wealth, into a ready-made position. Instead, she was being handed a front-row seat to the collapse of her own scheme. Mark stammered excuses, his parents demanded explanations, but I no longer felt the urge to argue. My role in their play was finished. I had already taken the steps that mattered, already built the foundation for my life without them. I stood, adjusted my chair back into place, and looked each of them in the eye. "You wanted me gone. Consider your wish granted. But I'm leaving with everything I've earned." That was the part you never saw coming. Then I walked out, my footsteps steady, leaving their stunned silence behind me like a closing curtain. The aftermath was almost louder than the reveal itself. Calls started flooding my phone within hours. First Mark, then his parents, each message more frantic than the last. Mark's tone swung wildly between desperation and denial. One moment he was pleading, promising he could fix everything. The next he was insisting I was misinterpreting the situation. I didn't answer. He had his chance to defend me, and he chose silence. Now it was my turn. When I finally agreed to meet him face to face, it wasn't for reconciliation. It was for closure. He arrived looking worn, eyes hollow from sleepless nights, and reached for me like I might still be his salvation. "Please, Lena, don't do this. We can work it out. I'll change." His words barely registered. I simply shook my head. "You made your choices. I'm making mine." Watching the panic spread across his face should have hurt, but instead it confirmed what I already knew. He only cared now because the consequences were real. His parents were less restrained. They spat venom through every channel possible: emails, voicemails, even mutual acquaintances delivering their insults. Vindictive, ungrateful, manipulative. Those were the labels they threw at me. But when one of them finally accused me of ruining the family, I answered with the clarity of someone who no longer had anything to lose. "I didn't ruin anything. You set the rules. I just played them better than you expected." The silence on the other end of the line told me they understood, even if they'd never admit it aloud. Meanwhile, Claire's glossy facade began to crack. Stripped of the promise of security, she floundered. The woman who once glided into every gathering with effortless confidence suddenly looked strained, her polished smile faltering under the weight of whispers. I heard through friends that she snapped at Mark in public, that she grew cold when gifts stopped arriving, that her charm faded quickly once the shine of privilege was gone. She had stepped into this family believing she would inherit a title, a home, and the respect of people who paraded her as their jewel. Instead, she inherited chaos and the reality that nothing belonged to her. Without wealth or status, she was just another outsider clinging to approval. And unlike me, she had no history of sacrifice to anchor her, no foundation to claim. The perfect daughter-in-law wasn't perfect at all. She was opportunistic, and when the opportunity vanished, so did her composure. I watched it unfold from a distance, detached. The storm they created was finally circling back to them, leaving me untouched. Mark's begging, his parents' fury, Claire's unraveling. None of it moved me anymore. They had underestimated me, discarded me, replaced me, and expected I would crumble. Instead, I walked away with dignity intact and the proof that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to bend. The first night in my new apartment was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. No voices echoing through walls, no footsteps pacing hallways that never felt like mine, no laughter I wasn't a part of. Just silence, clean, unbroken, and entirely mine. I unpacked slowly, savoring the ritual of choosing where each object would live. There was no rush, no one waiting to judge. The space felt small compared to the house I'd left, but every corner belonged to me, and that made it immeasurable. I had brought with me the things they once dismissed as insignificant. The quilt my mother stitched by hand, frayed at the edges but warm with history. The chipped coffee mug Mark's parents sneered at, but which had carried me through countless late shifts. A wooden chair I'd rescued from a thrift store, mocked for its cheapness, now standing proudly in my living room. To them, these items were worthless clutter. To me, they were anchors, reminders that my worth had never depended on their approval. One box held the smallest treasures: a pressed flower tucked in a book from nursing school, ticket stubs from the first concert I ever attended, the locket I wore when I walked down the aisle. I placed them carefully on a shelf, not as relics of loss, but as symbols of survival. They had tried to erase me, but here was proof of the life I had lived, the choices I had made, the identity they couldn't rewrite. As I arranged the apartment, I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just decorating walls or filling shelves, I was reclaiming power. Every picture hung, every drawer organized, every lamp plugged in felt like stitching myself back together. I realized I didn't need grandeur to feel complete. Freedom was enough. Choice was enough. Being able to breathe in a space without tension pressing against my ribs. That was wealth in its purest form. There were moments when the weight of everything I'd endured tried to creep back in. Memories of Claire draped in things that once symbolized my marriage, the echo of Mark's dismissive words, the sting of his parents' scorn. But here, in this apartment, those memories lost their sharpness. I looked around and saw not what I had lost, but what I had built for myself. For the first time in a long while, I woke up without dread. I brewed coffee in my chipped mug, sat in the thrifted chair, and let sunlight pour across my quilt. Simple acts, ordinary objects, yet they filled me with a sense of control I'd never felt under their roof. Power didn't have to roar or dominate. It could whisper through the calm certainty that I was enough on my own. This wasn't just an escape, it was a rebirth. I wasn't the woman shrinking in silence anymore. I was the woman who had walked away, carrying with her the pieces that mattered most. And in that simplicity, I finally found strength. Months slipped by, and with them came distance I hadn't realized I needed. My days filled with routines that were mine alone. Long walks after work, quiet dinners without tension, laughter with friends I'd nearly lost while drowning in a life that never valued me. Then, almost inevitably, the whispers started finding me. Mutual acquaintances, neighbors, even co-workers who still moved in their circle began to share fragments of news. Mark's world had begun to collapse in ways I didn't have to orchestrate. Without my steady contributions, his financial footing crumbled. The house that once stood as his parents' pride was suddenly burdened with costs he couldn't manage. The promotions he had chased seemed further out of reach now that instability followed him like a shadow. He had gambled on the illusion of a perfect life and discovered how hollow it was without a partner holding the foundation steady. Claire, too, was no longer shining under the spotlight. The stories painted her as restless, her polished charm fading once the material comfort she expected failed to appear. She grew distant, cold, and critical of the man she once eagerly hovered around. Her role as the ideal partner disintegrated without the rewards she thought were guaranteed. People who once fawned over her began to notice the cracks. Her temper, her vanity, the self-serving streak she couldn't conceal once admiration dried up. The in-laws, who had once paraded her like a prize, now carried the weight of regret in silence. They didn't reach out to me, they never would. Pride kept them locked in their own cage, unwilling to admit how disastrously they had miscalculated. I heard of their bitterness through others, the way they muttered about betrayal, as though they hadn't been the ones to orchestrate it. They had gambled their loyalty on someone who cared only for status, and when it evaporated, they were left with nothing but the echo of their own arrogance. And me? I listened to these updates without bitterness. There was no satisfaction in gloating, no need to twist the knife. Their downfall was theirs alone. I hadn't lifted a finger. Walking away had been enough. By choosing myself, I had already stripped them of the power they thought they had over me. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore, because I didn't need it. I had rebuilt, reclaimed, and risen quietly while they unraveled loudly. One evening, as I sat by the window of my apartment watching the city lights flicker, I thought back to the woman who had once felt erased, small, and powerless. She no longer existed. In her place stood someone who understood that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it leaves. Sometimes it takes back every piece of dignity, every ounce of love, every shred of worth that others tried to steal. And in that silence, I finally understood. The best revenge isn't rage. It's walking away whole while they collapse in the emptiness they created.